Good morning to everyone. It's good to see you all. Thank you, Brother Larry, for your prayer. Thank you very much. It is a pleasure to worship with you. On and off for the last several months, we have seasoned in our Sunday mornings a series on family life. And as Brother John and myself and Mike have talked about this, we think this may go on for a long time. It's just going to be something from time to time we're going to talk about, is things that relate to family life, and we're going to do that today. Manhood, biblical manhood. Boy, you want to start a fight, just go out on the street and talk about what does manliness mean and bring up terms like toxic masculinity and things like that, and boy, here we go, right? It's in the news, it's in our social media, it's in the common discussion around us, and so it deserves to be talked about from a biblical point of view. What is manhood? And specifically, we're going to think about that this morning in light of the family. What is the relationship of that subject to the family? We're going to begin in Genesis. We will get to the text that Dustin read earlier in a moment, but I want to start in Genesis because this is part of the created order. What it means to be a man, what it means to be a woman is fundamentally part of the created order, and that is established in this text before us, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. God created man. So whatever man is, it is that way because God created him that way. Now man has fallen, and by man I mean mankind has fallen. So there is a place to talk about the brokenness of mankind. So I suppose if you want to talk about toxic masculinity, I would say to that, yeah. I would put right with that also toxic feminism of toxic females. Probably the better way to say it is toxic humanity. That's probably the right way to say it. Yeah, we're a mess. We are. And it shows up in men and it shows up in women. And it shows up in men that are ways that are uniquely masculine. And it shows up in women in ways that are uniquely feminine. We are all toxic in some ways. But God did not create us that way. God created us to be in his image, not toxic. Now, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? Now, this text has a poem at the end. We would call it a poem. And that poem has parallel phrases that make this subject really interesting. Now, I have highlighted here in the 3 lines below the poem and the parallel words in that poem. The first words are God created, he created, he created. That's pretty obvious. 3 lines of this poem, and each of those lines include the Hebrew verb that has to do with God created. Created. God built it. God did it. God created. That's the first thing we see parallel in these 3 phrases. The next thing we see parallel in these 3 phrases is God created man, created him, created them, which tells us it's talking about mankind, not men specifically. Mankind, them. So created, the Hebrew verb, and now we have the man or mankind and the pronouns that refer back to that. That's the second parallel thing in this. Then the third parallel is really interesting, and the Hebrew poetry works this way. This is where it sort of drops the microphone on you. This is where here's the surprise. God created man in his own image. First line, image of God. Second line, image of God. Third line, male and female, is parallel to image. Now that's a fascinating statement because what that means is whatever it means to be in the image of God requires both male and female to accomplish that. God, or rather the author here, God speaking, describes being an image bearer parallel to both male and female natures. If you'll think about the early part of the book of Genesis, you remember what God said when he looked at Adam before he created Eve. He looked at Adam, and let me put it in my own words. He said, "Adam, you're a mess. You're incomplete. I will create a woman for you to make you complete. So God created man to need a woman, and he created a woman to need a man. Together, they function together to be the image of God. We know this as the family, the marriage. Now, not everybody gets married. Not everybody can get married, and there's exceptions to this all the time. But I think probably 99% of the people out there that are not married or never have been married, if you ask them, would you like to be married? If you found a good mate, a good spouse, one that would love you and you could have a great relationship, would you like that? I think almost everybody would say, yeah, I would. Circumstances have not brought that to me. Okay. That doesn't change the fundamental underlying truth that in our union, man and woman, the image of God is demonstrated. That's not my opinion. That is what this Bible verse says. The image of God is accomplished in the union of male and female. Now that brings up several questions. First observation is, obviously there must be a difference between masculinity, manhood, and feminine, being a woman. I've tried all week to say that word and I cannot say it. It's a mental block. So, being a man and being a woman, there's a difference. Because only when they are put together do you get image bearing, right? So there must be a difference. Today we're going to talk about things that would predominantly apply to men. But everything we say will also have at least some application to the women. So don't go to sleep. Some of this will apply to you. This is called cross-functional characterization. That's a big fancy word to say that between men and women, even though we have our unique natures, that in every one of our unique natures, there are ways that we cross-functionally support those characteristics. For example, we'll talk about men and sacrifice and courage. Does that mean that women don't have sacrifice and courage? No, it does not. But it reveals itself in men in certain specific ways. It reveals itself in women in other specific ways. You find that in the biblical narrative as you study this subject. So, just because we talk about some things today doesn't mean that they're not applicable to women. They are, but they are predominantly male characteristics, and we will think about them in terms of masculinity, the created order of masculinity. That's number one. Number two, Mike, what does it have to do with the family? I thought this was the Family Life series. Well, when God created the family, part of the family's job is image bearing. And image bearing only happens when men and women come together, or it's complete rather, when men and women come together in marriage and God's image is demonstrated. The Apostle Paul comments on this in Ephesians 5, and we'll talk about that later. And in that image bearing, God is glorified. Well, that requires men and women to do that. That's at the heart and soul of the family. John's last two sermons, he talked about the created order. That was central to what he was trying to say, is so many things about the family are established at the created order. That's what this is. This is telling us at the most basic kernel of truth regarding the family, at the created order of the family lies what it means to be a man and what it means to be a woman. So it begs the question that we're going to explore. What does it mean to be a man? Lord willing, and if should I find the courage, next month I will ask the other question. What does it mean to be a woman? I asked Mike Berry for some help on that, and so far he's been silent. So now I have cranked it up a little bit. I am petrified of that subject, I will just tell you. Because I don't have a clue. I just don't. I will search through the scriptures and see if we can muddle our way through it. But hopefully that'll be next month. Maybe a year from next month, but at some point in the future, of what it means to be a woman. But today, what does it mean to be a man? Okay, we read in our text this morning this story about King Saul. And if you remember in the text that Brother Dustin read, Saul was troubled. And was this problem going on within him, right? And he said, bring somebody to me that can help me deal with this rage I've got, this problem I've got, this evil spirit that's within me. And so a fellow speaks up and says, I know a guy. I know this guy. He's a young man, and he has all of these characteristics specific to his manly nature. Because Saul said, bring me a man who can play. And this guy raised his hand and said, I know a guy. This man, he's skillful in playing, a man of valor, a man of war, prudent speech, good presence, the Lord is with him. This man came in, that is being described here, into Saul's presence, and he brought peace. I said Paul. I'm going to say that several times today. Saul, King Saul, King Saul. He brought peace to King Saul, at least temporary peace. He brought stability to that home. He made things go better in Saul's home. Saul brought him into his home. David, who this is talking about, effectively became like he was a brother to Jonathan, actually married one of Saul's daughters. Real, true, biblical masculinity brings peace to the home. It brings stability to the home. It drives off evil spirits. That's what it does. Friend, my brothers, if your presence in the home is bringing evil spirits into the home, you've got it wrong. Your presence in the home should drive off evil spirits. It should run them away. It should bring peace and harmony. Now, there are a lot of things to talk about David. It didn't always work that way. The evil spirits really were powerful in Saul's life. But that's the framework of this discussion. Here comes David into the home, and what happens is peace, stability, love, and harmony, all those things that happened, and they happened precisely because David ticked off some of the checklists of what it means to be a man, and that's what we're going to do with this text. We're going to go through this text and say, what was it about David that brought that wholeness, that wellness to that home? And that challenges all of us men. That's what we're challenged to do, to bring these elements to our home so that we bring peace and drive off the evil spirits and bring stability and love and all of the harmony that is associated with what a real masculine man brings to the home. Okay, so let's start through it. First, this man says, this is just a guy speaks up. Saul says, I need a man. And this guy says, I know a man. And he carves off some elements here. He just said, okay, I know a man, and here's what's true about him. First, he is skillful in playing. That's talking about his ability to play what we might call the banjo, the lyre, some type of stringed instrument that the Hebrews played a lot. David was skilled at that. 1 Samuel 16, we read where it says, and whenever the harmful spirit from God was upon Saul, David took the lyre and played it with his hand, so Saul was refreshed and was well, and the harmful spirit departed from him. When I dated Han, I used my old 6-string guitar to make the evil spirits depart. Okay, there were no evil spirits, but I attempted to win her favor with that guitar. And I have a funny story about that. Those of you that are older will know this. We sat down, we were just got to know each other, and she could play guitar. I don't know if you guys know that. She could play the guitar. And she played a song. And she played it and sang it in Vietnamese, and it was da 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 da. And I said, no, I know that song. That's not a Vietnamese song. And she said, no, that's a Vietnamese song. I said, no. I know that song. It's a country and western song from the 60s, written by a guy that lived out in western Oklahoma. I'm 500 miles away from home is the name of the song. And she was playing and singing a Vietnamese version of it. And what happened is the American soldiers took that song over during the Vietnam War, and that culture adopted the tune and put their words to it. And that was one of our early dates, you might call it, is getting to know that. Well, that's the thing. Here's the thing about art, music or any other kind of art. It brings people together in unusual and unexpected ways. Now, I want to talk about art just a moment, because this is not something we would typically say, I'm going to talk about what it means to be a man. Let me talk about art. Really? No, yeah, really. because that's one of the things that is described here about David. When we talk about beauty, there's all kinds of beauty. The Bible says in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 10 through 11, I have seen the business that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. God created beauty. If something's beautiful, it's beautiful because God created it. Stand at Jackson Hole, Wyoming with me and look at the Grand Tetons, which we will do in a week or so. It's pretty breathtaking. Stand overlooking, I forgot the name of the river that runs out of Delta Junction out to the Anchorage, Alaska, up on the edge of the mountain, and look down that valley 100 miles one way and 100 miles the other way from snow-covered peaks. I got to do that about 5 or 6 years ago. It's breathtaking. There's nothing in this world like it. Come over to my house and look at these amazing flowers in the flower bed. Look closely. Don't just walk by them. Get down there close and analyze them. They are breathtakingly beautiful. God created beauty. It is part of his created order. In this world filled with chaos, art is the practice of going out to the edge of order, to the edge of chaos, where order and chaos intersect, and arranging it so that it makes sense. Let me give you an illustration of what I mean. I know some about music, so I'll use music to describe that. The practice of music is finding notes that go together well, whether in a melody or in a chord or in a song, whatever. And the way you do that is you put notes together that don't go together well. And then find ways to, David will know this term, resolve them. Resolve the stress, resolve the strain. You go to the edge of chaos and that 4 sustained 4th add 11 chord minus 13, which sounds horrible if played by itself, but then when it resolves back to the dominant chord, you get one of Haydn's concertos. It's beautiful because it's at the edge of chaos brought back to order. That's what music is. People that are creative, for that reason, are a little bit unusual, a little bit out there on the edge because they're flirting with chaos all the time, right? They're flirting with disorder. When Ludwig van Beethoven wrote the Fifth Symphony is made up of 4 movements, if you study this in school. 4 movements, which I forgot the terms of the 4 movements, but the third one was the waltz. The third one was when all the people with the wigs and the fancy hair in France, back in a long time ago, would get up and would dance to the third movement because they got tired of listening to the first 2 movements. So they would get up and they would dance to the third movement. Well, when the Fifth Symphony played, you know it. You know the Fifth Symphony. Ta-ta-ta-ta, ta-ta-ta-ta. That's the Fifth Symphony. That's the first movement of the Fifth Symphony. When the Fifth Symphony, the third movement of the Fifth Symphony played, people were outraged. They got up and left because Beethoven was flirting with chaos. It was too fast to dance to. It was so fast, it's supposed to be in 3/4, it's supposed to be a waltz. It was so fast, it was like 6/8 time. People were outraged. They got up and left because they could not stand the chaos. It was too close to chaos. When Elvis Presley, who everybody claims to love now, first came on the radio, people were outraged. Oh, this noise, they called it. And then the Beatles came out. Long-haired hippies, my grandparents would say. Or pick your form of music, you'll find it. People, what they do in creating music is they go to the edge of chaos and try to make sense out of it. Now, this is true in all forms of art. Paintings, Picasso takes what might look like chaos, and a lot of us look at his paintings and say, that looks like chaos to me. Study it closely, carefully, diligently, and you'll see he is taking what might feel like chaos and he's bringing it into what's really an amazing form of order. That's why a lot of these people end up in the nut house, because they're always dealing with chaos. Okay, I spent some time going into that because that's exactly what David was able to do. David was able to take his lyre and say, let me find chaos and make sense out of it. Brother Matt preached on it a few Sundays ago when he preached on Psalm 77. David took chaos, all the troubles he was facing that Brother Matt spoke about a month ago, and he began to work with it. And Matt helped us see that. And by the end, he said, his conclusion is God is sovereign. He made sense out of chaos. That's what art is, and that's exactly what David had as a unique characteristic. Men, your job is to find the chaos in your life and in your family's life. Find that chaos. Try to make sense out of it. Try to bring order to that chaos. It's an art form. You might do that by picking up an old 6-string guitar and playing Alan Jackson, who I just really love Alan Jackson, by the way. I don't know if y'all can laugh at me, but I really like Alan Jackson and George Strait and several others. That's just my particular flavor of music. Find that chaos in your wife's life, in your son's life, in your grandmother's life. Find that chaos and make sense out of it. Help them make sense out of it. It's an art form. You need to do this because they need you to be a man. And that's what it means to be a man. Is your wife troubled? Let me answer that for you. Yes. Does she go off the edge sometimes? Yes. I'll answer it for you. Do sometimes you wonder, does she really have a brain? Yeah, sometimes you wonder that. Because we're so different, men and women. That's okay. Your job as a man is grapple with that chaos. Wrestle with it. Engage it. Don't run away from it. Try to make sense out of it. Bring peace and order to it. Good luck with that. This is just as equally as difficult as any other masculine task you will ever take on. That was the first thing that the Holy Spirit tells us about David. He was able to take chaos and make sense out of it in the form of art. That's what a man does. Number 2, he was a man of valor. That's a great word, isn't it? Valor. Kind of like Dustin started. I know you got to say it this way. Valor. Valor. What does that mean exactly? Hebrew word insinuates courage. Courage in the face of danger and courage in the face of sacrifice. That's what David had. Valor. Courage. Now, this isn't to say that women can't make sense out of chaos and that women can't have courage. They certainly can. Just ask Jael, I think was her name, the gal that drove the tent stake through the guy's head. It certainly can have courage, but it's a different kind of courage. Courage reflects itself in a different way. Men uniquely are required to have courage. Courage and sacrifice. To have courage in the face of danger and in the face of sacrifice. Listen to a couple of verses here. 1 Corinthians chapter 16, verse 13 through 14. Apostle Paul to the church at Corinth, be watchful, stand firm in the faith, act like men. Be strong, let all that you do be done in love. Now here's what's curious about that verse. Nowhere else in the epistle to the church at Corinth does Paul define what he means by the statement, act like a man. Paul just assumes they know what that means. Paul writes that letter just assuming that likely the elders that will receive this letter at Corinth, we're not told who receives it, but from this statement, I draw the conclusion that it was either leading men that received the letter or elders in the church. Leaders in the church received this letter. And Paul says, all of these problems I've talked about, all of these difficulties you've got in your congregation, all the things going wrong there that 1 Corinthians enumerates for us, you know what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to act like a man. That's what you're going to have to do. Now, did the Corinthians know what that meant? Are we just left to our own devices to figure out what Paul means by act like a man? Well, it's not the first time that phrase was used. real similar phrase was used in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 9, in regards to Philistines. When the Philistines were going to make war against Israel, the enemies of God were going to make war against Israel, they said, "Take courage and be men, O Philistines, lest you become slaves to the Hebrews as they have been to you, and be men and fight." Whatever the Philistines meant when they said, "Hey, we're about to engage in a difficult time that's going to require, it's dangerous time, that's going to require courage and sacrifice," and so they say, "Let us be men in this effort." The Apostle Paul read the Old Testament. And when he read the Old Testament, he drew this conclusion, and he's so certain in this conclusion that he just says it in 1 Corinthians as a fact. Being a man means courage, means having courage in the face of danger, having courage in the face of sacrifice. Now we have another example that the Apostle Paul might have thought of. Brother Mike Berry spoke on this a couple of weeks ago. Remember the stack of rocks he talked about when Jacob left Laban and they made the agreement and they had that stack of rocks there, this little tower they made, which was sort of the not the border. I keep forgetting the word you used. Boundaries, thanks. The boundary that they had to create between a father-in-law and a son-in-law. And he talked about that as a natural part of what happens in a family. We got to create these boundaries, right? It's your side of the fence and my side of this. It's a natural part of family life, boundaries. It was a great sermon. It was just I went back and listened to it a couple of times, Mike. It was a really good sermon. And I encourage you to do that. It was about a month and a half ago, and it was on Jacob. Well, anyway, as he concluded, what had happened is as Jacob left, his wife Rachel stole some of the house idols. Every house had these little idols, and Rachel stole some of them. And Laban, the father-in-law, came to be aware of that, and he pursued Jacob. And he got out there, caught up with him, and it was a big conflict, and it's a risk of violence erupting. It's all this deal. And finally, as it unfolds and as it becomes aware to Jacob of what had happened, Jacob says, then Jacob became angry and berated Laban, and Jacob said to Laban, "What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me?" What Jacob did not say was, "Rachel stole them." He didn't say that. He did not say, I didn't do it. Blame everybody else. Jacob said, "This family is my family, and whatever problem you've got with this family, you've got with me first." A real man has courage and owns his family. And that's not some kind of power trip. That has to do with responsibility. He owns his family, and he owns their failings. Men, I don't know about you, but there can be a lot of failings in a family. When was the last time you raised your hand and said, "I own these"? I got my slides out, or I'm going to go to Ephesians 5 next. In Ephesians 5, the Apostle Paul, in describing the relationship between a man and his wife, a husband and wife, points to the church and says what Christ did for the church is a great example of this. He says, "Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, his body, and is himself its Savior." So Christ is like the husband, and the church, us, we're like the wife in this analogy. And Paul says, just like Christ is himself its Savior, so the husband should be to the wife. There's an analogy going on, a comparison going on. Well, what did Christ do? And what is Christ doing? Today, in heaven, at the right hand of God, when old Waylon makes some mistake, does something he shouldn't do, Christ is going to lean over, and Waylon, I'm going to pick on you here for a second. Christ is going to lean over to God and say, "That's me, I own that one." And then when Tripp does the same thing, Christ is going to lean over and say, My shoulders are broad. You can put that on me. I own that. Or Tony or Marty or any of the rest of us. To be a man means you're going to have courage and you're going to own the sacrifice required for this family. That's at the heart of what it means to be a man. The readiness to sacrifice in the face of danger. Ask Christ what kind of danger was involved for him to say, here, blame me, God. I'll take the blame for what Billy Bob has done. It meant that he had to die, didn't it? A very painful and miserable death. Now, Randy and all the rest of us, that's our example. That's what a man does. He owns the issues in his family. He doesn't pass the buck. He says, me, you blame me. That's what Jacob did. That's what Christ did. That's what we should do. But there's more to that sacrifice. That's what I think Timothy is really drawing a circle around here in 1 Timothy 5, verse 4 through 8. That willingness to sacrifice, that willingness to exhibit courage in the face of danger and personal harm reflects in lots of ways. And here's another one. But if a widow has children or let me skip down there to our verse. There where it says, command these things as well, so that they may be without reproach. But if anyone does not provide for his relatives, and especially for members of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. Brother Mike, why are you talking about masculinity? Isn't that just one of those details of Christianity? Can't we move on to something else? Well, let me ask you, what's more important than avoiding being an infidel? Tell me something that's more important than being counted as an unbeliever. If we were going to go through the Bible and try to sort of prioritize different commandments, what's most important, what's least important, and I'm not suggesting you can do that, but if we were going to try, tell me how this isn't right up there on the top 5. Maybe with Jesus, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, love your neighbors yourself, and provide for your family. Tell me how this isn't right there. Because if you don't sacrifice, provide, take ownership of your family, you might as well look in the face of God and say, I'm an infidel and I don't believe in you. That's what it might as well do. Men, don't ever let some preacher ridicule you because you've got to work. No, that's at the heart and soul of your duty as a believer in God. That's at the core of what it means for you to take ownership of your family, to provide for them. Now, does this mean that women don't or can't provide? No, it doesn't. But you're the one that owns it. You own this subject. God won't ask her, but he will ask you, did you provide for your family? Did you see to it that they had all the things they need? Or will I look at you and call you an infidel? David was a man of valor, and that word courage and sacrifice includes a lot. We could talk a lot about that. Maybe that'll come in some more talks later. There's so much to say about being a man of valor. Well, David was that man. Now, David, he says of him, this guy is a man of war. Now, what's interesting is David was pretty young. He was an older teenager, 16, 17 maybe. He wasn't very old. Probably had not seen war yet, not in a real way. Nevertheless, the man described him as a man of war. Now think of war as conflict. War happens in all different kinds of ways in our life. Now immediately we go to war, we think about, war between countries, war between families, we think about violence in war, and that's mostly what would be envisioned here. But it's accurate and fitting to think of this in terms of conflict. Conflict. David was a man that was not afraid of conflict. Not afraid of conflict. Now that's where a lot of us, we kind of shrink back and I'll go stand behind the barn now because there's conflict. No. When there's conflict, men, this is where you're supposed to stand. Jesus gave a parable in Luke 1, and the parable actually had to do with a different subject, a larger subject, but he offered, if you will, a parable within a parable. There's a larger parable, but within that parable, he gave another little parable. And this little parable gives you a little bit of a window into what Jesus believes about manhood. Listen to what he says in this parable within a parable. When a strong man fully armed guards his own palace, his goods are safe. But when one stronger than he attacks him and overcomes him, he takes away his armor in which he trusted and divides his spoil. Jesus looks at a house, at a home, and says that home should be protected by the strong man, a man fully armed, a man who is ready for conflict because he guards his own palace. His goods, his family, his house are safe. Now, in our world right now, that's a subject that comes up a lot, right? Between gun ownership and, owning, protecting your family. This kind of coming up a lot these days because this world's a violent place. It really always has been. We've just lived in a very peaceful bubble for a while. You might say we're headed back to a place where the world really always has been. I went to the Middle East back in April and spent some time there, and it's very much that way. I'll leave all the details out, but we were riding around with this guy, and we asked him, said, is gun ownership legal in Jordan? And he said, no, that's why everybody owns one. And it was translated to us. So the translation was kind of weird. We said, what do you mean? The fact that it's not legal is why everybody owns one. He says, well, they all buy them on the black market. Everybody in the country owns a couple, 2 or 3 guns because there are so many criminals and so much criminal activity, and it's so unsafe here that you have to have it to protect your family. This man was explaining to me exactly what Jesus says. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not telling us all we need to go out and buy guns. I'm not. There can be different ways you protect your family. But protecting your family is at the centerpiece, man, of your job. Protect your family. There are a lot of ways to do that where you live. That may cost you a little bit more. You may have to work some extra hours. That's okay because that's your job where you live. You might have to, figure out where we're going to live to get away from some of the troubles, right? The kind of lock you put on your door. There are differences. Some locks are really good. Some locks aren't that good. A real man, this man that Jesus is talking about, he does his research. He figures out the kind of lock that's a little bit harder to kick in. The kind of security system. Real man calls Gerald up. Gerald, somewhere. Calls Gerald up back there and says, Gerald, I need a security system. What do you got? Okay. Maybe a real man arms his home in different ways. These all can mean different things. Whatever the case, a real man is not afraid of conflict. Conflict, though, does not always show up in the form of violence. And hopefully, if you make wise choices in your life, it rarely ever will. I'm a big believer in that. Good, wise choices from the man in the house will keep your family away from violence so that you don't have to think about that. But it could. But don't you think about the language Paul uses in Ephesians 6, verse 10 through 12. Finally, be strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. Sounds like we're talking about manliness here. Strong in the Lord and the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. Not the guy kicking the door in, but the schemes of the devil. 4, we do not wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. Men, as much as you think about protecting your home in a physical sense, and yes, you should think about that, how much more should you think about protecting your family, your children, your wife from the ravages of Satan, not afraid of conflict. So you get in your car and you drive down to the school board and participate in the PTA meeting, if that happens to be your place in this world, or you pull your kids out of school. Or at the workplace, or at the wherever else, at the HOA, or wherever else it is that your family is engaged, you stand up and you face the conflict. You're the one who wrestles with Satan. And if you're making good, solid choices, and prayer is a part of your life, prayerfully, it'll never involve an act of violence. Never. But it will involve an act of conflict. And you got to have the courage to stand. That's the kind of man David was. David was ready and willing to face conflict. He was a man of war and not afraid. Prudent in speech. David was prudent in speech. There are a lot of colloquialisms that I'll not use here. But, we used to say about men, a man of few words, but every one mattered. Dale, I'm sure you've heard that, or phrases like that from long ago. A man of few words, but every one of them matter. That's another way of saying this, prudent in speech. He knew what to say, when to say it, and what not to say, and when not to say it. Boy, am I guilty. I am the guy who says way more than I should. He gets lots of stories. Anderson, I got lots of examples I could offer here of speaking when I should have kept my mouth shut. A real man knows when to speak, what to say, when to say it, and when not to say it. Now, one of the things inferred in this statement, prudent in speech, you might say, has to do with tact and discretion. Another way of saying he is a gentleman. A real man learns to be a gentleman. There's a movie out there. It's about this family that, it's an old movie. They had to go, they thought there was a nuclear war, and so they went into this cave down in the ground, and they're under there for 30 years. And when they come out, this boy that grew up down there, he's very well behaved, and the culture around him doesn't really quite know what to do with him. And he comes out, and somebody says something about being a gentleman, and they said, I don't know what a gentleman is. And he says, oh, a gentleman is just somebody that makes everybody around them feel comfortable. Did you love that definition? I think it's a really good definition. A gentleman is somebody who behaves in such a way that puts people around them at ease, who diffuses conflict when possible, who puts fires out when possible, who's always working to eliminate chaos. That's what a gentleman does. Looking for a way to make people around them feel at ease and comfortable. It's exactly what this passage is talking about in 1 Corinthians 13, verse 4 through 8, when it says, love is patient, kind, does not envy or boast, is not arrogant or rude. Those words there are a different way of saying, or a way of saying, I don't make you feel uncomfortable. When you and I are at the dinner table over at Olive Garden, I don't act and behave in a way that makes you feel uncomfortable. That I choose my words carefully, that I behave in a way so as not to make a scene, and I behave in a way that makes the people around me feel at ease and comfortable. That's who David was. You know, in England, they send young boys to school to learn this, to be gentlemen. And I'm afraid that it's becoming a lost art. Because it seems if you look on social media or any other public forum, that the exact opposite is the case. We look for ways to stir the pot, to make people feel on edge and angry and mad. And the more they put it at us on the evening news, the more they sell advertising because we just keep buying it. Well, it's wrong. A real man finds ways to diffuse the anger, to bring peace and harmony, to wrestle with the chaos and solve and resolve the conflict. Men, your families need you so badly today to do that. More than ever, to bring peace, calmness, to diffuse conflict, to be prudent in speech. My dad used to say, if you don't know what to say, shut up. But there are times you have to say, you have to speak, you have to stand against conflict. But not for the sake of conflict, for the sake of, what does he say here? Not being arrogant or rude. Bringing peace to the situation. And we could talk about that a lot. That's one of them. A man of good presence. The King James, I think, uses the word comely, which is not a real great translation of that word. Because it means more than, some people say, well, it means handsome. He was handsome. It means more than that. It means a lot more than that. What it means is could apply to any man, because, you know, some of us are handsome and the rest of you, well, you just got left out, right? So, yeah. You know, there are Dale McDaniels in this world, and there's the rest of us. You know? He's not handsome. This translation is really good. A man of good presence. A man who knows how to present himself. A man who knows how to present himself. You know, when they serve food, a lot of you watch these cooking shows, right? And whatever these guys are, they're well known. They come out and they put it on they call it plating the food. If you've watched the TV shows, you know, they plate the food, right? And they plate it in such a way it looks really good. It's about the presentation. It's the same gravy and mashed potatoes, but they put it on the plate in a way that makes it look more yummy, right? That's the essence of this phrase. Men, how do you plate the food? How do you present what's your presentation of who you are? Now, God gave you what he gave you. You're either handsome or you're not. Right? You're either like Matt, tall, dark, and whatever the rest of that is, or you're not. But we all have something. And God expects all of us, as a part of our masculinity, to present ourselves in a good way. A man of good presence. This is another thing we could talk a lot about. But this is talking about mostly, and what he's talking about here, is the physical presentation. There are a lot of things that you could talk about. In this context, he's really talking about what you could see and hear and taste and touch and feel, what the senses will understand from meeting this man. Song of Solomon, Solomon's wife-to-be at the wedding looked up and saw Solomon coming. And when she saw Solomon coming to the wedding, this text is what she said. And this text tells you a lot about how a man should present himself. Okay, listen carefully. This is her, and she's very attracted by it. She finds this very attractive. She sees Solomon, and this really means something to her. It's very attractive to her because Solomon is presenting himself the way a man should. Listen to what it says. Who is this that cometh out of the wilderness? Here he comes from chaos, but he's solved it. And what is he bringing out of chaos? Like pillars of smoke, it's coming up out of the wilderness. Why, it's impressive the way this man is marching out of the world's chaos to come be my husband. Perfumed with myrrh and frankincense, with all powders of the merchant. He took a bath. He put on some cologne. He combed his hair, for crying out loud. She was impressed. Solomon presented himself to her. Now, we don't say myrrh and frankincense. We say Old Spice and there's another one, Axe, that everybody uses today. Whatever. I don't know. I use electric shave is what I use, Steve. From the 60s. That's what and that bottle of cologne I bought in the late 60s. So. David presented himself in a way that the women in his life, he had multiple wives, found him attractive. That's what he did. He was a man of good presence, as was Solomon. Let's keep reading. Behold his bed, and this means you've seen in the old films or whatever, they carry this guy up on a like a platform or some sort of an ark. There, a bunch of guys are carrying him. That's what this is describing. It's not his bed he sleeps in, but it's just like his chariot, his elevated chariot. Behold his bed, which is Solomon's, 80 valiant men are about it, of the valiant of Israel. You know what she sees here? She sees a man of success. Here's Solomon setting up on this elevated chariot, and there are 80 men around it, glad to be there. And it looks great, and they're carrying him to the wedding. Here they come, and she sees him up there. You know what she sees? A man in control of his world. That's what she sees. Not some slob sitting in the basement playing video games. She does not see that. She sees a man in control of his world, who took a bath and combed his hair and put on some cologne. That's what she sees, and she likes it. What else? Valiant of Israel. They all hold swords, being expert in war. Every man hath his sword upon his thigh because of the fear in the night. Not only does Solomon ready to engage conflict and grab the chaos and bring it to order, but Solomon has surrounded himself with other people who do the same. Who do you play golf with? Well, yesterday I got to play golf. Well, they played, I don't know what you would call what I did, but I got to play golf with Larry and Billy Bob and Terry and Reese, Tripp, Dustin, Kevin. There you are. Yeah. I played horrible, by the way. It was just an embarrassment, but I really enjoyed watching those guys play. It was a great morning. It was a wonderful morning to spend time with brothers. It was great. And it was good to be surrounded with men who carry their swords ready to slay the chaos in their life. It was. You know, that's what women like. That's what they like. They want to look at you and see that you've surrounded yourself with men of success, men who know how to conquer the chaos. If you're running around, buddies, have no discipline, have no order in their life, have no direction or goal, and look like they haven't taken a bath in 3 weeks, you're running with the wrong group. You are. This is what it means to be a man. She liked that. She really liked that about him, who he was surrounded with. King Solomon made himself a chariot of the wood of Lebanon. You know what else she likes about him? Part of what he's presenting himself, he's handy. He's kind of like Mike Berry. He can make furniture and make doodads, and he has skill with his hands. Now, I don't know if Solomon got the saw out and made it himself, but he oversaw the making of it, and he took this very expensive cedars of Lebanon, wood of Lebanon, and he made this chariot that he's being carried on. That's this bed we're describing, this chariot he's being carried on. The usage of the word bed earlier in the text is a metaphor. It's a chariot he's being carried on. He made it. He made it just for this occasion, and she likes that. Husbands, fix a few things around the house and see what that will yield for you. Oh boy, am I going to get it when I get home. After listening to the squeaky garage door for 3 months, oil the garage door, which I did yesterday finally. Fix a thing or two. Be a man of good presence. That's exactly what this phrase is inferring here. Clean up, comb your hair, take a bath, put on some cologne. Surround yourself with successful people who know how to conquer the chaos in their life. I better move on. I could talk about this a lot. It's a very interesting text here in Song of Solomon chapter 3, and every young man in here should study it. If you can't figure out why the girls aren't just flocking, calling you up, why aren't they knocking on your door? This is why. This is exactly why, because that's what they're looking for. And They're not finding it in you, not yet. So this is your list of things I need to work on. Finally, this man says of David, the Lord is with him. Now here's the thing about it. None of the rest of the stuff really matters if this is not true. And this is what he concludes with. Now, what's funny about this story, and I know I'm going a little bit long, but I don't take time to work this out. Here's what's funny about this story. When the next day, when David come up and said, David's in Saul's house now, he's been playing his guitar, and Saul feels good about it, and all this is going on, right? And then David shows up at the battle with Goliath, and David tells Saul, hey, I can kill this guy. And Saul says, you're not able to go up against this Philistine to fight with him, for you are but a youth, and he has been a man of war from his youth. You know what Saul says? Saul looks at David and says, David, you're not man enough. You're not man enough to fight this guy. You know what was true with Saul? He didn't have a good understanding of manhood, just like the world around us. The world around you, men, may look at you and say, oh, he's not a man. There are those voices out there. Ignore them. Defend yourself. David defended himself. And I want you to listen to what David said. It's fascinating how David answers this question. When somebody else said of David, Saul, you need a man, let me give you this man. And we give these characteristics we've been looking at. And then when something happens, Saul looks at David and says, David, you're not man enough. You can't do this. Listen to David's defense. David said to Saul, your servant used to keep sheep for his father, and when there came a lion or a bear, he took a lamb from the flock. I went after him and struck him and delivered it out of his mouth. And if he rose against me, I caught him by his beard and struck him and killed him. So David says, yeah, I am man enough. Let me tell you what I've done. When I was watching the flocks, if a lion came up and took one of the lambs, I would chase the lion down. Really? Yeah. I would go after it and chase the lion down and take the lamb away. This is stuff from movies, isn't it? And this is a great picture here of this shepherd boy, 15 years old, and here comes a lion, steals a lamb, and this 15-year-old boy is going to go chase him down. He chases the lion. You know what he does? He takes the lamb away from the lion. Wow. Then, if the lion turns on him, you know what he does? He grabs that lion by the beard and he takes his knife and thrusts it in it and kills it. What a man. Wow. That's his defense for being a man? No, it's not. Not at all. Your servant has struck down both lions and bears, and this uncircumcised Philistine shall be like one of them, for he has defiled the armies of the living God. And David said, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear will deliver me from the hand of the Philistine. And Saul said to David, go, and the Lord be with you. Every aspect of your manhood is a waste of time, and you are not a man if it's not connected to the Lord being with you. Flanders Field is filled with the bodies of men who made great sacrifice, but the Lord was not with them. They were not men. Omaha Beach is stained with the blood of young men who exhibited a great amount of courage, but if the Lord was not with them, they were not real men. The peaks of Iwo Jima, the ghosts speak from the brave men who died there, brave, courageous men of war who were not real men. Because a real man knows how to lace this truth that the Lord is with you through every one of those characteristics. That is what a real man is. And don't ever, ever, ever let the King Sauls of this world tell you otherwise. Hope you've enjoyed the study this morning. I'm sorry I went just a little bit long. If we can assist you this morning in helping you obey the Lord in baptism, to come to Christ, to become a part of the bride of Christ, to be part of his family, to be saved, to be in the church, we can assist you that in the waters of baptism. If you'd like to request the prayers of the church this morning, we can help you with that as well. Either case, if we can, come forward while we sing the song that has been selected.